All right, Brother Adnan, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me this morning. We've been attempting to do this for a while. Super grateful that you were able to make this work. And I've had the opportunity to meet you in person. You were here in Calgary speaking at the local mosque, which is very close to my house. I'm super grateful to have had the opportunity to hear from you and some of the work you're doing up front. And that's what inspired me to reach out to you further and bring you on the show to learn more about your story and share that with the audience, but also draw out some of the amazing work you're doing within the community, because there's so many lessons that we can all take out from it. And I'm sure we'll get into why you've felt inspired to help people find their why. But before we jump into all of that, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself. You do have an accent, so it'll be interesting to hear your background and
Mhm.
where you are now and what you're doing with your life.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and joy to be with you on the Easy Conversations podcast, Furkhan. I've been listening to some of the previous episodes and really benefiting a lot. I think it's really great work, great conversations that you're able to do on this platform. And I pray that the benefit just keeps being extended in
Thank
many
you.
ways. And great work that you're doing in the community in terms of your involvement in mental health. And I know you have a pretty powerful story in terms of coming around, reorienting career wise to get back into that. So, yeah, it's just great to reconnect after, as you said, trying to set this time for a while. I had a bunch of all technical issues that came up and had to replace all kinds of equipment on my end. And then we finally made it happen. Alhamdulillah. Praise God. So before I begin, I just like to start with some remembrance. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. In the name of God, and peace and praise be upon the messenger of God, and all praise be to him. So you asked about my story and a bit of my background. Yeah,
Yes.
so I'm an educator and coach primarily these days. My passion is helping primarily Muslim professionals and entrepreneurs reconnect with their purpose by integrating spiritual depth into their professional lives and their personal lives. That's my passion in general. And where I've come from in terms of what's brought me to this place is, well, yeah, you mentioned accent. I'll get that over with in terms of, yeah. I sometimes say I grew up with one foot in the US and one foot in the UK, and that leaves me drowning somewhere in the Atlantic
Yeah.
when you even them out. So I was partly in Minnesota where I grew up. So at least in terms of climate wise, not too different from Calgary,
Yeah.
but then also the UK. So American mother and British father. And that experience, Britain and America, they're separate they're pretty similar culturally, but there are differences. There are subtle differences, and so I grew up with an experience of feeling out of place
Mm.
in to a certain extent in many different ways. And so much of what's gotten to me to the place where I am today is just trying to find my place at the end of the day. And so I tried to do that various ways, but it was really religiously and spiritually that I felt like I was able to find a home. As I said, grew up UK and Minnesota, primarily Minnesota, growing up in a Protestant Christian environment. When I was in college, that was when I found a different religious and spiritual commitment, which we can get into more in
Mhm.
detail as the conversation continues.
Mhm.
But found myself then coming to Islam my first year of college, and then just going deep into it and trying to learn as much as I could, and following the doors that opened basically just brought me to being in positions of inspiration and initiative in the Muslim community from a very early age in terms of my Islam, if you
Mm.
will. Just a few years being into Islam, and I was already in positions of inspiration and an initiative. And by 2014, so this is a few years out of college, was the Imam and Muslim chaplain at Brown University in Rhode Island in the US. And then from there, I started a PhD in Islamic studies at Harvard. And then about 2.5 years ago, I branched out as I'm still working on finishing the PhD. Yeah, pray it actually gets completed.
Yeah.
But as I'm finishing the PhD, I wanted to branch out, start my own business, speak and teach on the things that I'm passionate about,
Mhm.
which I've mentioned, just helping people access the spiritual depth of Islam, primarily Muslims, but also I think this is a part of human civilization which all
Mhm.
of us can benefit from. And so part of that work too is the work that I've been doing recently on content to do with finding our mission and purpose in life from using tools that are derived from the Islamic spiritual tradition, but that don't require one to be committed to that tradition particularly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I appreciate all of that. So, lots of questions coming up for me. The first one that really piqued my interest was around finding your place and
Mm.
struggling with that.
Mhm.
What about connecting with the Muslim community at that time allowed you to find that place? What was it that felt like home for you? And how were you able to then navigate that?
Yeah. So home for me, spiritually and religiously, as I was growing up, was my Protestant Christian community. It
Mhm.
was my specifically, what was it? Presbyterian. There we go.
Mhm.
Specifically Presbyterians. Oh, it's been so long that sometimes I forget about the
Yeah.
denominations. But it was a Presbyterian church that I grew up in. As my mother tells the story, I was 7.5 when we moved to the US from the UK. And she says that one of the first things that I mentioned when we moved is that I said, I want to find a church so that I can get baptized. I
Mm.
was the one who was passionate about finding a place, finding a spiritual home in that regard. And growing up, the church, my Presbyterian church, was my spiritual home.
Yeah.
I felt stimulated and felt seen in a way. I had a place there intellectually, religiously, spiritually, even musically. It was unlike churches that a lot of my friends went to, which incorporated more contemporary music. It was all classical music,
Mhm.
choir, and two huge organs in the sanctuary. I really felt a sense of place there, especially being a classical pianist myself. I was that was the main thing that I
Mhm.
did growing up. Did solo recitals and competitions. So I felt so much a place there up until the last year or two of high school for
Mm.
me. Then we got an interim pastor, and things just started changing. Everything that was predictable before, just things started shifting, even to do with the way that worship services went.
Mm.
The interim pastor, wanted to do things a different way and seemed to have a need to assert his authority in certain ways and push certain things. And that was a real, almost like a spiritual crisis for me
Mhm.
that caused me to ask the question. Like the whole reason I joined this church was so that it would help me with my relationship with God. And if my means for relationship with God is so shakable, easily moved and transformed into a way in which it no longer feels home and no longer feels quite stable for me. What
Mhm.
does that say about my means to my connection with God? So that's where I was left towards the end of high school. It was
Mm.
feeling like in this place that I took for granted as a place that could be home for me. It doesn't really seem like it can be home. I can't be confident that this place is going to remain the kind of place I need it to be. And then, sure enough, going to college now, halfway across the US, I had to find a new religious community, and there were basically two kinds of options when it came to Christian community. There were the churches in the area in this small college town of Hanover, New Hampshire, that mainly were full with and catered to people several generations above me. It doesn't really resonate with me, and I didn't
Mhm.
really see people my age. It was either that or gatherings in which the kind of worship and the way that they talked about God as the creator of the universe and the originator of existence just felt disrespectful. Like they talked
Mm.
about God as if he was their buddy.
Mm.
Oh yeah, it just seemed a little too populist and just
Yeah.
disrespectful for me. I didn't feel at home in either of those, and so it was then I wasn't looking for anything different. I wasn't looking for Islam, but Islam found me.
Mm.
I was studying Arabic at the time. I was fascinated by the Arabic language, and I don't know, you might ask, you've heard me mention this before. The
Yes,
reason I wanted to study Arabic, and this is
we'll
it's
get into that.
it's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
sensational part of the story. I wanted to be an FBI agent.
Yeah.
That the FBI needed expertise in Arabic. And so at the time, this is a few years after 9/11, then I decided I loved languages anyway. So I decided I was going to study Arabic as my means to getting into the FBI. So I was studying Arabic. And studying Arabic, I had to take at least one course on Arab culture. And it was that course that then exposed me to Islam on a deeper level than I had before, beyond just a few paragraphs in a world cultures textbook in high
Mhm.
school. And I realized at that time that so many things within Islam spoke to me on so many different levels and were the kind of things that I had been looking for my whole life, but hadn't fully articulated.
Mm.
For example, the form of prayer, the 5 times a day canonical prayer that Muslims do. That was one of the first things that grabbed my attention and clicked with me. I realized I've been looking for this my whole life. I remember being a boy and going to bed at night. And before I went to bed, I would say my prayers. It's what I understood a good Christian, a person who is serious about their relationship with God, would do is pray before going to sleep. And my prayers, they just felt empty because the one way I knew how to pray was, oh God, here are all the things that I'm thankful for. And then here are all the things that I want. And in regards to what I'm thankful for, how do I even know what I'm supposed to be thankful for? There could be things that are messing me up and I'm not thankful for, but in a few years I'll look back and I
Right.
am. And what about all the things I need? How do I know what I need? It just seemed selfish and self-centered.
Mm.
I remember thinking to myself, there must be something that I should be doing on a regular basis, ideally several times a day, not just at the end of the day when I'm tired and everything else is done and okay, I take a quick minute to say some prayers. Ideally, several times a day, some way for me to acknowledge my creator and my gratitude to him. And so as soon as I found that form of Muslim prayer, I realized that this is what I was looking for. And I said, okay, I'll incorporate this into my life to be a better Christian. That was my intention at the time.
Mhm.
And this was just one example of several things that really resonated with me in Islam and lots of parts of the theology
Mm.
too that I realized, whoa, this makes so much more sense than what I've had so far. And that was a process then of taking one thing after another. And so I piled up, oh, okay, this thing makes sense. Oh, and I like having that in my life. And I like having that in my life. Pretty soon, it was about 2 months into that journey that I realized this is how much I have invested in Islam. This is how much I have invested in Christianity.
Mhm.
And I'm looking here, okay, I guess that makes me a Muslim.
Mm.
I never had intention to convert. No one was trying to convert me. I had started speaking to Muslims on campus. When they tell me now, after the fact, years after the fact, they tell me because one of the first Muslim woman I ever spoke to actually later ended up becoming my wife years
Mhm.
later. And they said when they remember that time, they said it seemed like you had your direction and you were going to become Muslim. You were just asking for clarification on a few minor points, but no
Yeah.
one was trying to convince me. I wasn't trying to work something out, find something else. As I said, Islam found me.
Mhm.
With that, then a sense of place, a sense of home,
Mm.
especially going through now having lived as a Muslim for almost 20 years at this point, having gone through all the different experiences I've gone through, including the pilgrimage, which just brings this to the forefront, the sense of place and home in the world that I have had the experience of now twice, once for the lesser pilgrimage, which we call Umrah, and then once for the major pilgrimage, which is the Hajj, that
Mhm.
is the big one that people hear about and it happens once a year. I've gone for both, and from both experiences just confirms that sense that there is this mode of worship and even a place of worship there in Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which presents the focal point
Mhm.
for all of us who are committed to our relationship with God in this certain way and grounds us and it gives us a place, a sense of home. Yeah, every Muslim typically when they go to, you just came back from,
Yes, I
I'm
did.
speaking to the choir.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
yeah, what did you feel that almost a sense of home there in Mecca? There's a part of me that like feels like this is where I'm supposed to be.
It was
This
very
after many
emotional, and even as you're bringing it up, I can feel the emotions come up again, just being able to put myself back there. And yeah, I was just, there were so many things. I think one of the things I've been talking about is that really hit me was as I'm doing the tawaf, where you walk around the Holy Kaaba. And in that moment, I just became fully present and I was rubbing shoulders with people from all parts of the world.
Yeah.
And we're all dressed in the white garment and there's
Mm.
no difference between us. And that
Right.
just, that sense of unity really hit me hard in that moment. But yeah, I mean, there were so many aspects of it. I agree with you. That sense of home. My son said something last year because he went for Umrah as well. And that kept coming up for me as an 11-year-old, him bringing that up is you pray in that direction every day, but to be able to
Mm.
be there and see it with your own eyes is just
Right.
phenomenal. And I
Right.
think that's, for me, that was the sense of being home and being around people who are all there for the same reason was definitely a huge ordeal in
Mm.
that moment. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So it sounds like you can relate that sense of home that, yeah, that I felt from the very beginning coming into Islam, and then is only amplified through those experiences of going for the pilgrimage at
Yeah.
Mecca and those kinds of opportunities. It's a sense of place and a sense of home in a world which, to me, in my experience, is becoming increasingly unstable.
Hmm. Yeah. And in your story, it's fascinating that you had this calling within you to connect to God from a very young age. Why do you think that was there, or where do you think it was coming from? To be at 7 and to articulate that, hey, this is really important to me, that's very fascinating for me.
Yeah, as Muslims, we believe and we're taught through revelation from our Creator that everyone has this primordial disposition. We call it the fitra. Primordial disposition of we had a life before this life, which once we come into this life, we can sense echoes of, we have resonances of. We had a life before this life that was in the presence of our Creator. We acknowledged His existence and we were there in His presence. And he called us to testify, am I not your Lord? And we acknowledge, yes, indeed you are. So that's imprinted on us. And so the origin of that that feeling of wanting to get to know God, that's where I see it, is in just
Mm,
that primordial imprint upon us. Now, you could ask the question of why, yeah, it doesn't seem like a typical thing a 7-year-old
mhm.
would be after is really articulating, okay, I want to establish my relationship with God. I want to get baptized. Normally, that's something that's done for the child at that age. And so, if there's difference there, then I see what I see in my story is that, particularly for me, my sense of place and grounding was more called into question at that age than for a lot of people. There are people who've gone through much more ungrounding in their lives for sure, but the experience of being not quite British and not quite American, and therefore never quite fitting in
Mhm.
either place from a very early age gave me that sense of I can't find my place right here in my direct context. I have to find it somewhere else, somewhere deeper.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And going back to your college days, so you touched on it. I wanted to explore that further with you too, of wanting to be in the FBI. And obviously, that was your way into understanding the Arabic language, the culture, which then brought you to Islam. So then what shifted for you? Where did the dream of being an FBI agent come to an end? And obviously, now you're on a different path. But where was
Or am
that?
I?
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Well, and anytime I do an interview, there are always some people in the comments who have to share. I bet he's just undercover.
right. There you go. Yeah. You
So
tell us
no, I
anyways.
think yeah, I definitely I can mention the ways in which tables have turned, and I've been on the other side of the FBI in ways in which our community has gone through times in which the FBI was leveraged against our community as a
Mhm.
political tool, and I've felt the force of that. And yeah, I'm definitely have severed ties with the organization. But sorry, I interrupted you as you were
No,
continuing.
I that was my question. was to understand what shifted for you, and then where did you decide to go on a different path and then not pursue that career.
Yeah, yeah. It was, yeah, it's interesting looking back on it because my passion and what I felt like my mission in life of being an FBI agent and serving my country and my community and really finding, once again, finding a place professionally in that, it almost, I think I could put my amateur therapist, psychologist hat on and analyze what was going through me at that time. But I think it came from a place of insecurity, of feeling like, okay, I'm not here. I am as a boy in America, and I don't quite feel a sense of place. But if I'm responsible for the security and the protection of the people around me, that will give me a place.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'll have. I was looking for a function in community and thinking about going into law enforcement. That gave me a clear sense of a function, a sense of place socially, in a way. And that then led me, as I mentioned, to studying Arabic, and then studying Arabic led me to Islam. And I kept up both interests for a number of years. For a few years, was diving deep into Islam as well as continuing to go through the motions of working towards an FBI career. I did 2 internships with them, had a top secret clearance. If anyone asks, I've seen one sentence on a single document that was marked as top secret. And but the cool thing I can say, let's see, how long ago was that? That was about 15 years ago. It's another 10 years before I can tell you exactly the office that I was working on, because in 10 years that information will become declassified at this point.
Mm.
It is classified information as to which office I interned at. But so did two internships with the FBI, and then was continuing to consider that as a career option when at the same time, this was a time, it was a second peak. There was the peak after 9/11 that happened, in which the security apparatus of the United States is leveled against the Muslim community,
Mm.
and a lot of injustice happened in that time. But then the years now in the early teens were the years of things are happening in Syria. Iraq is devolving. It's the years of ISIS. That acronym, sorry, sometimes that has to get bleeped out in order to put it on social media. I
Yeah.
think talk of the Islamic State across the world and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a second wave of, in many ways, for political reasons, suspicion against the Muslim community being used politically for domestic political reasons in the US. And so that was starting to I was starting to wake up to what was actually going on. So just coming older, maturing, becoming older, not being so naive about how well-meaning people are used when they commit to certain institutions like the military or the police force, how that can be used for political ends, and their intentions and good commitments can then be used by people in power just to serve the interests of people in power.
Yeah.
But it was one moment in particular that really brought everything to the forefront when, as I said, the first Muslim woman I ever started speaking to, a few years after those first conversations with her, we reconnected after we'd both graduated from college and realized we wanted to get married,
Mm-hmm.
wanted to pursue a life together. And it was when I met her family for the first time that I was having a conversation in her parents' living room, and a father who's lovable, but also has an intense side to him, and a man, an Afghan refugee from the 70s, and then settled in the US and built a life for for himself in Colorado. We were sitting down having a conversation in his living room, and he said to me at one point, he said, "I think we need Muslims like you in the FBI,
Mm.
but I don't think that Muslim can be married to my daughter."
Mm.
And it was in that moment that I realized, yeah, he's right. I see his point. I said, getting married to your daughter is more important than my career
Mm.
aspirations right now. So I gave up that dream, which had been a dream for me at that point for almost 10 years. I gave it up in that moment. And then was another 10 years basically of trying to pick up the pieces of my sense of mission in the world, and my sense of place
Mm.
too. in terms of how do I relate to other people around me? What is my contribution? What's my service to my community? It was very
Mm,
specific. I had a very specific and driven sense of law enforcement, protection. That is my place within the community. And then once that was taken away from me, I had to rebuild it. And it took me a while to rebuild it.
mm,
And once I finally got out of that, then using many of the resources which I had learned as spiritual techniques, technologies, if you will, within the Islamic tradition, I then felt an imperative, felt a responsibility to then help others use those same tools that I
mhm,
use to find their place in terms of their mission in this world, their sense of place with respect to the other people around them. How are you serving in this
mhm.
world, and what is your unique contribution while you're
Yes.
alive?
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to come back to that because that's definitely an area of focus you have now. Other just one other question around your journey to Islam, and I am curious, how was that received by your own family of origin, and how has that been over the years, especially over the last 2 decades for you,
Mm.
cultivating that?
Yeah, yeah. I've since one of the hats that I've worn in the Muslim community is that I've actually worked in convert care before,
Mhm,
taking care of people who are recently committed to Islam. So I've heard and helped people deal with all kinds of different situations in
mhm.
terms of how the family takes it. And I think I was pretty lucky comparatively in that
Yeah.
regard. My mother has always been committed to the church, but not necessarily for strongly held theological reasons and that kind of thing. She was when I told her about my Islam, I think she was concerned initially because it was freshman year of college. I think kids tend to make stupid decisions their freshman year,
Yes.
first year of independence. She was worried that it was just one. I was a pretty good. I was very law-abiding, disciplined, quote unquote, good kid growing up. And so I think she might have thought, well, okay, like this is going to be one of the ways in which he makes a foolish decision freshman year, completely changing his religion. She was
Mm,
a little concerned at first, and concerned too about my place and what place I would have in this new religion, which
mm,
isn't prime. It doesn't seem to be primarily for people who look like me and have a
mm,
background like me. My father has always been has always benefited from a number of what might be termed Eastern religions, if you will,
mhm,
Taoism, Confucianism, a bit of Hinduism. And so for him, it was just he didn't really ask too many questions or really have much concern himself.
yeah.
It was just like an update. Oh yeah, I went swimming this week. Yeah, I became Muslim this week. Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing, yeah. So, what were the steps that you took, and how are you now distilling that as a form of teachings to people around finding their purpose and mission? And there's one visual you had shared in terms of our mission being in this world and our purpose being to our creator in a way.
Mm.
So, are you able to speak to that? And what are some lessons that you're now in terms of sharing with people that you're working with?
Right. Yeah, I find it helpful to use the framework which you just alluded to, thinking about our horizontal why, if you will, and our vertical why.
Mm,
Horizontal why being the people at your level, so fellow creation,
mm,
humans just like you. How do you relate to them? What is your element of service to the rest of creation? The vertical why to me is looking at how do you relate to the planes of existence which are beyond what you typically operate on. And so to God, if that
mhm,
word is helpful, to the creator and originator of existence, to the universe, if you will, if that
mm,
helps. I think a lot of people, especially in the English language, it can have baggage around the word God or things like that. And I think the Arabic language, as the language of conveyance of Islam, I think avoids a lot of the pitfalls that we have in other languages, just with baggage with certain things.
mm,
Often, when we say God in English, it immediately evokes a thought of a bearded man bearded, gray-haired man in the sky
Yeah.
ordering things to happen, which is absolutely not what we're talking about. So perhaps it's better summarized as saying the unified force of existence. That to me, it's important to make a distinction between the relationship with that unified force of existence and the
Mhm.
relationship with the rest of creation. And to me, this gets down to the difference between purpose, which I see as the vertical relationship, and mission, which is the
Mhm.
horizontal. And to me, purpose is the most important thing to work out, but mission is a close second.
Mm.
If we work out purpose, if I work out what is my relationship to that which unifies existence, to the universe, to the divine, I'll be okay in
Yeah.
life. There are many ways in which I'll be okay in life, and I've settled the major question. And as long as I have a sense of place in that regard. But if I haven't settled the question of what is my mission, how do I relate to everyone around me? In my experience, the vertical mission almost remains a hypothetical, remains a theoretical, because as we understand it coming from the Islamic tradition, as we understand it as Muslims, one of the unique abilities of the human being is to operate on several levels of reality, is to be able to experience several levels of existence. Most of us have hold in this positive tension, these two experiences of feeling a sense of agency, that I'm making decisions and I'm responsible and I can see the cause and effect that happens in my life. But also in the big picture, feeling a sense of destiny of, wow, I look back at my life and wow, who knows? How could I ever have gotten myself here? It
Yeah.
seems like there's something I was called to. There's some destiny, even if we don't believe in God or divine decree and that kind of
Mhm.
thing, in a sense that there's a destiny for me and there's part of me, part of my existence which is beyond time. Sometimes I can have a dream in which something is signaled that is going to happen in the future, and then it happens. There are all kinds of different strange experiences we can start having as humans in which doesn't quite fit the pattern of cause and effect and individual agency. It seems like time is not necessarily linear for us.
Right.
Most of us hold these, some sense at least, of these two things in this positive tension. And, but almost all of us operate on the day to day in this space of I have a family to provide for. I'm going to make money. I'm going to do this.
Yes.
I'm going to make sure to get my sleep so I'm good for the next day. We feel our sense of responsibility and we
Mhm.
feel that engagement on what I see and we as Muslims see as the lowest level of reality, the
Yes.
material reality and the world of cause and effect. And so if I have a sense of purpose but not a sense of mission, that means I have a sense of an overall a thread and theme in my life. But in terms of what does that practically mean in my day to
Mhm.
day and my individual agency and responsibility,
Mm.
it, it very easily remains theoretical and hypothetical and doesn't really get practical. And so that's the first step for me, is because I find now, specifically working in the Muslim community, I find a lot of Muslims with a strong sense of purpose.
Yes.
A lot of people still need help in that regard. And that's also something that I feel a passion on building resources around it and continue to try to help people with. Is
Mhm.
there are a lot of Muslims who, even within Islam, they don't see their sense of place. It's like the kind of Islam, the kind of religion that was presented to them isn't something that really works for them. And they want
Mhm.
something else. They feel like there should be something else. And some of us need help with our sense of place in regards to our purpose. But what I find for the most part within the Muslim community specifically is, okay, I have a sense of purpose, but my sense of mission, it's not really clear.
Mm.
I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying
Right.
to get through this life,
Yeah.
let alone like what is my contribution? What's my legacy? How am I serving? Man, I just hope that God doesn't hate me when my time comes and I'm taken out of this world. It's just to be that we be in a good place in the next life, and that's all I really want to think about. But this life is our means for preparing the next life, as we're taught it coming from our Islamic tradition.
Yes.
And so then, yeah, to your question, I felt a responsibility for helping people figure out this sense of mission. But also, it was at the time too when these thoughts were coming together and a sense of responsibility was starting to dawn on me. I was also reading some other resources like Simon Sinek, his
Yes.
book Start With Why. One of the things that struck me about that book is Simon Sinek presents a really strong case for why each of us individually need a strong mission statement for our
Hmm.
lives.
Hmm.
Strong statement of service. How are you serving? What are you doing with your life, and how are you serving other people in this world?
Hmm.
But he says in that book, he then says at one point, he says, this whole book is about the importance of finding your why,
Yes.
your sense of mission, and how to tell that you've really found it. But then he says in his book, he says, actually, defining your why isn't the hard part. The hard part is staying consistent to it,
Mm. Mm.
is really having those reminders and aligning your whole life around it. And once I read that in that book, Start With Why, it clicked with me. It dawned upon me that, wow, within the Islamic spiritual tradition, we have the answers to that question, which Simon Sinek is not answering, and many
Yes.
others are not quite able to answer,
Right.
in terms of it's outlined for us within our revelation, within our prophetic tradition of these are your key enemies in life. These are going to be the main voices in your head that are going to try to take you off your mission and off your purpose. And here's how to deal with them. And then here are some of the spiritual exercises and just practical things that you can do in throughout your life and throughout your day to not forget what is most important to you. And this is
Hmm.
a key theme of the Quran and of the Islamic prophetic tradition, is this theme of dhikr, of
Yes.
remembrance. This sense that you don't have to necessarily learn anything new. You just have to keep reminding yourself.
Yes.
In fact, in Arabic, from a Quranic perspective, the word for human, the word typically given for human, insan, the root of that, or one of the possible roots, is forgetfulness, nisyan. Insan and nisyan. You can hear, even if you have no experience in Arabic, you can hear the relationship between those two.
Hmm.
So, by our very nature, the human is the being who forgets. And
Yeah.
the solution to that is remembrance. And
Hmm.
so everything I do in terms of my work in the community is trying to help package practical tools inspired by tradition
Yeah.
to aid that remembrance.
Hmm.
Aid clarity first, clarity of mission, and then remembrance, to allow ourselves to align our whole lives around
Hmm.
that mission. And
Yeah.
so that's why, yeah, much of the content I speak on, which you heard me speak of
Yes.
in Calgary, and then I run a coaching program around this, and just try to build resources that are beneficial in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate all of that. And just to unpack some of it, I agree with you. I think for the most part in the community itself, people do have that sense of purpose, but they struggle to find that sense of mission, which can then also, what I've observed is can start affecting their sense of purpose too, right?
Yeah,
Because they don't have that clarity. However, when I see people who have that sense of mission, but not that sense of purpose, that can lead to anxiety because my observation has been you can do the practical things, but then if you don't have a sense of, okay, what does this all mean?
mhm,
This is all going to come to an end. As you were talking about, this world for us in our tradition is a preparation. But if you can't tie into that, then you have that sense of anxiety around, okay, what are the options available to me? And how do I find that purpose in terms of, in our case, at least being able to have that connection to God, right? And how we
right.
internalize that. So there's that piece for sure. And we can definitely unpack it. But the other thing you touched on was the enemies, or at least in your model, you referred to them as foes. So I definitely want to explore that as well. Are you able to touch on that?
Yeah, yeah. Let me get to the first thing that you touched upon first, about the sense of having a sense of mission, but not a sense of purpose. I completely agree with you. It very easily it's not tethered. It's not grounded. It very easily leads to anxiety for several reasons. One of which is that if we're all about mission, all about accomplishing something specific in this world or serving in some specific way, then we're going to be all about our own agency and the cause and effect of our
Mhm.
own decisions. And that is naturally anxiety producing. I
Yeah.
think that's the main reason why we have such an uptick in anxiety in modern Western society, is because this is the vision of our lives and the vision of reality, which is just being put upon us, that
Mhm.
you have to and even more so than in previous generations, you have to take care of so many responsibilities. You don't even have to prepare for you and your family for, like, say, the next year. You got to think about 50 years down the line.
Yeah.
Are you going to have enough money in your retirement? Like, you better think about it now. You better be saving. You better be budgeting so you can put all that money into retirement.
Yes.
There's so much more. Like, your family's not going to be there for you. We're compartmentalized in terms of our nuclear family, that external support structure. You
Mhm.
have to do it all. Get the right insurance in case this happens and that. It's so much our
Yes.
own agency. It's naturally anxiety producing.
Mhm.
But then, especially too, if we, as the human naturally does, though many people learn to repress this, but if we have a sense of an external force which seems to be guiding things,
Mm.
and
Mhm.
especially if we see, like, we're on a particular mission and we see just like doors keep closing, and then many people would say, it seems like the universe doesn't want me to be doing this.
Right.
If we don't have a relationship with that force, that unifying force, very easily, yeah, now what do we do with our sense of agency? Now we need to try to assert our sense of agency on that unified force.
Yes.
That's a huge burden to carry.
Yeah.
So when we have a relationship with that force, and especially come into relationship with it, because as one of my teachers put it, atheists say they don't believe in God, but I say I don't believe in atheists.
Yeah.
Perspective, if we properly define God as the unifying force and default of existence upon which all other existence is founded, the atheist is simply denying a certain characterization of that force. Oh yeah, I don't think necessarily this force has a personality or has a will or that kind of thing. But the fact that I'm sitting on a chair right now and it looks like you're not standing up, but I presume you're sitting on a chair too, right?
Yes.
And yet, if I were to show you what my chair looks like, it's going to look very different from your chair. But the fact that we even use conceptual categories for completely different things,
Mhm.
but there is a unity to it. The fact that there is a unity that pervades existence upon which all of our lives are founded, then the question is not, does that unifying force exist? But the question is, okay, does it have certain characteristics?
Mhm.
Does it communicate with us? Does it have a personality? Does it have a will? And so those are sub theological points now for us to argue. And I would argue that it is indisputable, if you're really serious about actually going through logical proofs and thinking about this systematically, it is undeniable that this force has these certain characteristics. If it didn't have will, if it didn't have knowledge, how could it have given it? How could we suddenly have
Mhm.
originated this? Because you don't see anything bringing itself into existence
Right.
anyway. That's a tangent
Yeah. Yeah.
theologically. And also, too, looking at the historical record, looking at it linguistically, historically, everything, the Quran, I'm sorry, there is no way to explain the Quran and what the Quran coming 1400 years ago was about to say about existence itself,
Yes.
such that 1400 years later, with the advancements that we've made in science and technology, there are things that are still accurate in the there were things that the people could not have known at that time. To point out one simple example, the fact that in Arabic, when you say bees in general,
Mhm.
bees is it's a masculine noun in Arabic. And yet in the 16th chapter of the Quran, which is called the chapter of the bees, when God addresses bees, when Allah speaks to the bees, he uses feminine pronouns for speaking to the bees who are going out and collecting fruit and making the honey. That for centuries boggled the Arabic grammarians because they couldn't understand why this would be a
Mhm.
feminine address. And only in the 20th century have we learned that the worker bees that you see out actually
Yes.
doing all the work are the female ones, and the men just lay at home waiting around to impregnate the queen.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent we got off of
Yeah.
here.
No,
We were
that's
let me
helpful. Before you
okay,
move on to the foes thing, I do want
yeah,
to ask a very quick question because there's constantly this debate around free will, and you've been talking about agency, right? So there is that aspect of free will. And how does that coincide with divine will from our Islamic tradition based on your understanding? Because some people can get very passive, and there's a concept that we talk about is the spiritual bypassing too,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
so then where do you find your place in terms of knowing that you have free will, and then there's the divine that is overarching in that sense?
Yeah. Yeah. And you bring up something actually that is often a point of conversation for people I work with in the coaching program I run around this content of finding your mission and aligning your life around it.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking to a sister the other day who was talking about, yeah, how do I reconcile having this active sense of mission, but also understanding that God has predetermined everything? How do I put these? Because she said, when I pray for certain things, I pray, how do I know that I'm praying for the right thing or
Yeah.
praying for something that God is pleased with or wants to happen?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this comes back to a point I mentioned before of the unique characteristic of the human is to be able to perceive and ultimately operate on several levels of existence at once.
Mm.
And our will operates on a level of reality which is still real, but it's the lowest level of reality. The reality of cause and effect and linear time on a higher plane of existence, if you will, because words start to break down. Right, words themselves. Every word is a concept. Every word signals a concept, and every concept is a delineation. It's a delimitation.
Mm.
And so, words themselves, language itself, is actually a function of material reality. And so, higher levels of reality ultimately need to be experienced. They can't really be talked about. Right?
Yes.
It can be indicated, alluded to. So when I say higher, obviously everything now, higher is just a metaphor. Everything that I say is metaphorical language, getting at an actual real experience of. So if you'll excuse my language, on a higher level of reality, it is simply the will of that unified existence, which that's the only thing that exists. Like
Mm.
nothing else has will. There is a single will. As is mentioned in Quran, you don't will except that Allah wills. He was the one who willed it first. And when we try to reconcile the two, when we try to put the two on the same plane and reconcile them, it makes absolutely no sense and we just get confused. But when we understand that, here's maybe a better example. A human operates on a very basic level on three dimensions at once.
Mm.
At any point in time, you and I are doing something, we're also thinking something, and we're also our doing and our thinking has meaning. There's a
Mm.
reason behind it. At any point, yeah, I got 3 kids at home. It might have come across on the audio. One, the smallest was being put down for nap time
That's
a few
okay.
minutes ago. It probably didn't pick up on the
No.
microphone, but it may have. But even from an early age, I can ask my kids, "Why did you do that?"
Mm-hmm.
It is never it is always a permissible question for me to ask you why, human to human. There's always a reason. Even if the reason is just, "Well, I felt like it." That's still your why.
Yes.
So, we are at the very least operating on 3 dimensions of reality. I'm doing something, I'm thinking something, and I'm meaning something, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. So doing, thinking, and meaning. In a way, body, mind, and soul, body, mind, and heart. If you were to say, "Okay, you're doing this thing, so why like you're doing this thing, but you're also you're speaking on this podcast, Adnan, but you're also thinking about your lunch upcoming. Like, how can that be possible at the same time that you're
Mm.
speaking on this podcast, but also thinking about your lunch and how hungry you are?"
Yeah.
I'm actually not. I had a good breakfast, right? Just a tangible example. The answer is, what do you mean? I don't have to reconcile the two. They're different planes of existence that I operate on simultaneously. Like I can have a conversation and also be thinking about the rest of the day, and then also thinking about what this all means to me. I
Mm-hmm.
don't have to put them all on the same level. And so when we understand that as our potential as humans, we can properly understand that the path forward for us as humans is not trying to put them all on the same level, but to go all in on one and not the other. Our potential as humans and the path forward for us is to go all in on all of them simultaneously.
Mm.
So in terms of our engagement in the world, we have this drive in this direction. And this is what I was telling this sister, this young woman in the coaching program the other day, is that you have your sense of mission. And when it comes time, when you're praying to God for certain things, you pray that He gives you success in that mission. You're able to do that. You have these specific things.
Hmm.
But then in your heart, you simply witness what He's doing in your life.
Mm.
And your heart doesn't have any attachment to a particular outcome, even though outwardly you're asking for this outcome. This is what I really want. God, please allow me to be of service in this way and allow this to happen so that this can happen. I can benefit that person and that kind of thing. But then when all those doors are closed, the heart is just at peace because it's present
Mm.
with what existence decides is actually going to happen.
Yes.
And when we understand that and go all in on those different levels, that's when we actually become complete as humans.
Hmm.
It's the spiritual bypassing, or what would be the opposite of spiritual bypassing, a lack of spirituality,
Yeah.
which is the extreme. So either trying to bring God's will and the will of unified existence to our level and say, I'm not even going to try because all the good is already, it's any good that comes to me, any bad that comes to me, it's all just God. So I'm just going to sit here and wait for things to happen.
Hmm.
No, like you quickly realize that you get very depressed and fat and ugly and everything bad when
Right.
that happens.
Yeah.
When you try to do that, try to do not doing anything.
Hmm.
And similarly, with a lack of spirituality or like a lack of tethering to those higher planes of reality, as so many people are experiencing it these days, but don't have the language to be able to articulate it. When you're only engaging on your own will and your sense of assertion of what you need to do in your life, that exhausts your soul.
Mm.
There's no way to survive. That's one of the reasons why there's such a pandemic of people taking their own lives these days. Is okay, the natural conclusion of that, you determine everything in your life. Okay, then make that final decision
Hmm.
for when you get to go. Like that's the natural decision for natural conclusion of that line of thinking. Whereas in previous times in cultures, when we had more grounding in traditions that gave us that proper perspective,
Yeah.
we didn't have that much of an issue with people taking their own lives because at the very least they felt okay when my time comes. And yet, so many of us are trying to force things to that logical conclusion of yeah, your very life and existence is up to you. And the fact is, like, no, it was never up to you. There are plenty of people, thankfully, who aim and plan and do everything to take their own lives, and then something happens. They have a change of heart or something, or the plan doesn't go right, and their
Hmm.
lives are transformed. And
Yeah.
there are plenty of people like you didn't bring yourself into existence. So
Hmm.
to think that you can bring yourself out of it is equally nonsensical.
Yeah. And as you were sharing all of that and everything you've talked about having that why, it reminds me of the Nietzsche quote around he who has a why can bear any how. And
Mm,
that's what I draw out from the prophetic traditions where they had their why and you look at the stories and the adversity they experienced and the resilience they had. That is something I see that's lacking in the world today is this resilience because most of our lives, when you compare our current times to the past, is
mm,
built around comfort. And
yeah,
that sense of resilience is gone. And often we don't have the driver to seek out that why, which can then make life lacking meaning in a way. Yeah.
right.
Which is probably a good segue. I know I've touched on it a couple of times, but what are the foes then in our life that can take that sense of meaning away at times or that sense of purpose?
Okay. So the foes framework I use is taken from the Quranic presentation of who our enemies in this world really are.
Mhm.
The enemies in this world, from a Quranic Arabic perspective, it's nafs, hawa, shaitan, and dunya, ego, Satan, whim, if you will, and the material world. To remember those, I find it helpful to use this framework of FOES: feelings, outcomes, ego, and Satan. For one, feelings. What I mean by feelings is wanting to feel good and feel comfortable, like you mentioned. The modern world, all about just tending to our comfort. And it doesn't necessarily have to do with physical comfort, but psychological comfort as well. Oh, I don't want to be I want to be triggered in this certain way. Okay, there are people who've gone through significant trauma in their lives. I speak from personal experience. I had some developmental trauma that I had a season of therapy in my life, had to work through and that kind of thing. But in general, when I talk about a psychological comfort. It's that sense of having our default personality and feeling comfortable with a certain way in which we operate in the world. Oh, I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert. I'm not the kind of person who does these kind of things. That is all summed up for me in this one word, feelings. It's what you feel like you want to do. That is going to be an enemy to us. It's outlined in the Quran, but just thinking about human psychology, if we can move past that and use certain techniques to run around that, we're going to be more impactful, more successful, happier in our lives. When we finally find comfort with being uncomfortable in
Yes.
different ways because of a deeper sense of purpose, deeper
Mhm.
sense of mission. So that's the F infos. The O infos, outcomes, is this alludes to much of what we've been speaking about in the last few minutes
Mhm.
of operating on the level of material existence, the
Yes.
level of cause and effect. So if my mission is tied to a certain outcome, like I'm going to be a neurosurgeon. Oh, okay. So that requires then certain things happening and not happening in your life to get to that point. What happens if no one admits you to medical school? Or what happens if you don't get that certain appointment with that certain institution, with that certain doctor, which was going to set you up to be able to have this successful career as a neurosurgeon?
Mhm.
When our sense of mission is tied to anything that can be put in a checkbox, and that is anything that can be accomplished, specifically, I did this, or this happened, or this didn't happen, that's a sign that info's outcomes has affected us, has poisoned our sense of mission. Because the real sense of mission that we need to find is a sense of success that no one can take away from us.
Mhm.
What happens? It's our overall level of intentionality. This is how I'm showing up in the world. No matter what people throw at me, no matter what the world throws at me, no matter what doors are open or closed to me, I'm trying to do the same thing, the thing that I feel called to do in this world as long as I'm here. And I'm going to keep doing it until my time is done. The E info is ego. It's just our self interest, us wanting the credit, wanting to do things our way. It's closely related to feelings, but just slightly different in terms of just our sense of self and wanting to assert our sense of self on everything else. And so the more that we can let go of that and allow things to happen, allow things to be accomplished without us getting the credit or necessarily us doing it, but knowing at the end of the day, okay, this was my intentionality, and okay, someone else took the credit, fine.
Mhm.
But this mission is more than me. It's not just to do with me and what people think of me, right? So we need to get past that ego. And then finally, Satan, and using the S in the foes too. I sometimes, if people have hang-ups or they don't like the term Satan because of their particular religious experience, I also talk about this, define the S as shadow. It's our shadow side.
Mm.
And so just like the key student of Satan is at the end of time in the Christian tradition, the Christian and Islamic tradition, Abrahamic traditions, at the end of time, the Christ reappears, but also the Antichrist.
Mhm.
Generally, when we have a Y, this S in foes is our anti-Y. It's basically just the antithesis. It's everything, the opposite of what we want to be.
Mm.
It's that force inside of us that whatever is going to be good for us, it wants to just take us somewhere else, take us the opposite way.
Yeah.
So if it can't convince us to do something bad, which we know is bad, it's just going to convince us to do something that's beneath us, which often can be actually just overwhelming us in
Mhm.
terms of our sense of mission. Oh, I have a certain sense of mission of I want to be I want to be feeding hungry people. That is my sense of mission, to help feed hungry people in this world. And so it's okay, I'm going to do something once a week then. This is what I have time for. This voice of Satan or shadow, one of the ways that it gets to us is saying, "Oh, okay, you want to feed those hungry people? You serious? Once a week? You're not going to make a dent in hunger that
Mhm.
way. You better be going 5 times a week, man, going out and going outside your comfort zone and that kind of thing. It's going to want to overwhelm us in our sense of mission so that eventually we just give up that mission. It's, yeah, whatever. I can't do it. It's not sustainable.
Mhm.
Anything that will bring us away from that sense of mission, that's Satan. It's our
Yeah.
shadow side. So
Yeah.
those are the foes: feelings, outcomes, ego, and Satan.
Yeah. And just to tack on, I think for the S, another way of looking at it is perhaps shame, because that's
Mm.
how it manifests for a lot of people, is that feeling of not being able to do enough or not feeling good enough, no matter what
Mhm.
they're doing. So sometimes I
Right.
see that as well show up.
Right.
But no, Adnan, thank you so much for this conversation. I think just to summarize, based on the wisdom you've shared, there's so much that people can draw out, especially if they're feeling lost, using these lessons from Islam, as you shared, especially in the world we find ourselves in, which can sometimes feel unstable. I think there's so much meaning that we can draw out from these traditions and especially the Islamic tradition. So I really appreciate your time today. And thank you so much for taking or giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about your coaching program and how you're serving the community, and I know you're also creating content, what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah, excellent. Just I want to reiterate too and put it right back at you, Brother Furkhan. It's been a great pleasure and joy to be with you here for this time today. And once again, pray that this platform for you is a benefit to you and to many others for many years to come.
Mhm.
And for those who are interested in engaging more in the kind of things that I speak on, you can find me on LinkedIn or Facebook is where I tend to be in terms of social media, Adnan Wood Smith. And then also I have a YouTube channel, which is my name, Imam Adnan Wood Smith as well. Try to post beneficial things out there. And then two, in regards to the coaching program and resources around finding your wine and aligning the rest of your life around that, if you're interested in that, you can head to greaterwhy.com. And there's also a why strength test that we have up there too, where you can put your sense of mission to the test and see how it measures up. Is it really a strong, resonant sense of mission for you? So that's greaterwhy.com. And just love to hear and connect with anyone. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's great to be with you, Furqan, and thank you very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, no, thank you. We'll put all of that show note in the show notes, but thanks again for the chat today. Really appreciate it.
Okay, likewise.